For more than 30 years, Partners Global has worked to peacefully manage change, investing in and accompanying civil society organizations through their own growth processes. Today, we support civil society organizations around the world to be more resilient in increasingly hostile civic spaces. We are the founding member of the Partners Network, a global network of CSOs grown through long-term individual and organizational relationships built on mutual trust and respect. Network members have been in relationship for years with a common mission to advance peace and transform conflict. And the way we have been doing this is through authentic partnership and accompaniment, inclusive processes, and conflict sensitivity, all to bring about more peaceful, secure, and accountable societies. Indeed, the Partners Way is quintessentially locally led. Local leadership is in our ethos. It's central to everything that we do. And so given our history, we eagerly welcome the renewal of attention and analysis on the concept versus reality of locally led development and how US donors, particularly USAID, and even implementing partners have either facilitated or impeded the local leadership, ownership, and capacity necessary for peaceful change and sustainable development. As a member of the Alliance for Peacebuilding, we've been able to engage in advocacy around proposed legislation to enhance and improve USAID's new Partnerships Initiative, or NPI. This legislation seeks to simplify access to USAID resources, support local leadership, and strengthen local capacity. Our engagement on the NPI draft legislation last fall prompted many internal conversations and consultations with our network colleagues and a range of project partners to learn more about their experiences with USAID and other donors. As the data began to accumulate, we recognized that we'd only touched the surface with respect to inputs from non-US stakeholders. And so the idea of this PeaceCon session was born. And so today, the focus is on you, the participants, local peace builders, CSO leaders, and all who are taking action and really making things happen in your own communities and countries. In addition, some of you may be aware of the new policy brief recently published by AFP, Strengthening Locally Led Peacebuilding from Policy to Action. The policy brief outlines the importance of locally led programming and enhancing the ability of
Kira, I think you're muted again. Sorry about that. Good to go.
Sorry about that. All right. So I was just talking about the policy brief that AFP recently released, and it includes best practices and challenges for donors and implementing partners that they're facing now, and provides also 10 recommendations for meaningful implementation of locally led development. And Bridget, I think you're going to drop the link in the chat for anyone who's interested in reviewing that if you haven't already seen it. While the policy brief incorporated experience and inputs from a range—
Reminder.
Yes? So the policy brief incorporated experience and inputs from a range of CSOs. The authors are welcoming additional feedback, especially on the recommendations. Some of these issues will no doubt emerge today, as will other topics and perspectives, as we collect and compile your thoughts, reactions, comments, and practical solutions to the challenges and complexity of this idea of locally led development. It's now my distinct pleasure to introduce our plenary speakers for the session. First will be Noemi Molina. Noemi is a gender and social inclusion specialist and a human rights team lead at Partners El Salvador. Noemi has worked in the field of human rights in Central America since 2003 as an activist, researcher, and CSO leader. She was part of a gender research team at the German-based International Center for Violence Research, focusing on violence against women in the Northern Triangle. And in 2017, she joined the USAID-funded Rights and Dignity Project team at Partners El Salvador. Today, Noemi will help frame the conversation by sharing her experience with a co-implementer model, where a lead partner works with more experienced actors as primes, as well as their experience, her organization's experience, seeking to become a direct recipient of funding. Next, we have Sierfo De Iscondre. She is the Director of Programs at the Rule of Law Empowerment Initiative, also known as Partners West Africa, Nigeria. Sia manages the citizen security and rule of law programming. She has a wealth of experience in managing program portfolios across the security sector, governance, economic development, agriculture, and health sectors, as well as 15 years of experience in the development and financial services sector. Sia is going to focus on some examples of the role local leadership has played in US government-funded projects during implementation, and particularly in crisis management. And Alex Sardar is the Executive Director of the SEEP Network. He has more than 20 years of experience in global development and social justice advocacy. His professional focus has been on amplifying diverse voices and strengthening the agency of people to decide what happens in their lives and in their communities. He's served in leadership positions at Civicus and Counterpart International and a variety of CSOs around the globe. His experience as a refugee from Armenia and later working there for many years has taught him the living definition of resilience. Alex approaches the conversation from several angles, suggesting that we view locally led development efforts through a capacity lens, a political lens, and a durability lens. And to further set the stage for our conversation, I'm very pleased to introduce Congresswoman Sarah Jacobs, who will offer remarks on the importance of localization in US foreign assistance and appreciation for your valuable inputs into the conversation today. As you've seen in her bio, Representative Jacobs represents California's 53rd Congressional District, which includes San Diego in Southern California. At 32, Congresswoman Jacobs is the youngest member of California's delegation and the third youngest member in the 117th Congress. Among several committee assignments, she sits on the House Committee on Foreign Affairs, and she's provided leadership on the drafting of a House version of the new Partnerships Initiative legislation introduced in the Senate. While she unfortunately could not be with us in person today due to some last-minute committee-related travel, we are very happy to share a video of her remarks. Over to you, Bridget.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for the invitation to speak today. I'm thrilled you all are gathered to talk about locally led development and to hear from local organizations about what they need to thrive in their communities. Getting our development assistance right is incredibly important for U.S. foreign policy goals. Because at the end of the day, we can say all the right things, craft the right programs, have the right foreign policy objectives, but if foreign assistance dollars are not doing what we intend them to do, then none of the other things matter. And one of the most important ways we can ensure that what we are doing matters is shifting the power back to the people in the communities we're aiming to serve. That means asking them what they need to support their communities, to thrive, and if needed, providing the support and resources to make their goals a reality, all while putting them in the driver's seat. And that's why it's critical the United States really re-examine how it provides development assistance and make sure it's working with truly local entities in its programming. Thankfully, USAID Administrator Samantha Power has chosen to prioritize this goal and give it the high-level attention it deserves. I feel very hopeful about her announcements on USAID's localization agenda, including committing to providing at least 25% of all USAID funds to local partners within the next 4 years. I was also very excited to hear about the pilot program, the Central America Local Initiative, to devote $300 million to work directly with local organizations in El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. These initiatives have the potential to make an undeniable impact on decolonizing aid and putting the power in the hands of the communities we are supporting. And Congress has an important role to play here in making these promises a reality. Providing the necessary resources, flexibility, and support to these initiatives and working with USAID and providing new authorities and increasing staffing levels will all be critical parts of this. For example, all of the earmarked funds we like to authorize, while they can be really important, can sometimes make it really difficult for USAID to be nimble and adjust as crises across the world erupt and demand a timely response. So we need to provide more flexible funding so that we're not stuck in plans and programs created 2 years ago that are no longer relevant. And look, certain parts of USAID do this well, the Office of Transition Initiatives, for example. So we need to look at how to apply those practices and mechanisms across the entire agency. We also really need to look at the barriers to entry to be a partner at USAID and think creatively about how we can reimagine what the process looks like. I look forward to working with the administration on how Congress can best be partners in this goal, because it's clear to me that the most effective, efficient, and equitable way to do development work is to put the people in the driver's seat and support them as they lead the way. That means we really need to work directly with local entities, both in the design of the programs and in the implementation. Local people know how to solve their own problems. They just need the resources to do it, and we can provide that. And that's why I'm so excited to hear from all of you and brainstorm ways we can work together. I'm honored to be invited to speak today and to be a partner in the important work you all are doing. Thank you so much.
Sorry, Kira, you're muted.
I've been trying to unmute myself. Sorry about that, everyone. Thanks so much to Congresswoman Jacobs for these insights on development assistance and her commitment to localization and the importance of shifting the power back to the people and the communities the U.S. is supporting. And we're very happy to have Sophie Jones, Legislative Assistant to Representative Jacobs, here with us today. She'll be joining one of the breakout sessions, and we'll be working with her to compile and present the results of this consultation to Congress through her office. And now I'd like to turn it over to Noemi Molina. Noemi will be speaking in Spanish, so for those of you who need interpretation, please ensure your channel is set to the appropriate language. Please note there will be a slight delay in translation to French, Arabic, and Russian. The interpreters will be using a relay method, interpreting from Spanish to English and then to the other languages. Over to you, Noemi.
Bueno, muy buenos días, muchas gracias por la invitación. Nada más quiero chequear que me están oyendo a través de Abner, nuestro intérprete. Muy bien, bueno, muchas gracias, bienvenidas, bienvenidos, es un placer estar acá con todos ustedes. Mi nombre es Noemi Molina, soy abogada, soy feminista, soy salvadoreña y como lo han dicho mis colegas, soy parte de una organización salvadoreña que se llama Partners El Salvador, orgullosa miembro de la red Partners desde el año 2013. Y como saben, nosotros nos dedicamos a promover iniciativas de construcción de paz a nivel local, poniendo en el centro a las personas y promoviendo y facilitando la colaboración entre ellas. Hoy quiero compartir como ideas de inicio dos perspectivas desde nuestra experiencia de los últimos años en proyectos financiados por la cooperación internacional en esta línea de la que nos hablaba la senadora Jacobs, de permitir que los actores locales lideren los procesos de desarrollo con fondos internacionales, concibiendo el desarrollo como este proceso nunca acabado, multidimensional, siempre en construcción para conseguir condiciones mínimas que dignifiquen la vida de las personas, las comunidades y los países. Es decir, me gustaría muy brevemente hablar de los retos y las ventajas de dos modelos muy cercanos a nuestra propia experiencia y sesgados por nuestra propia experiencia, desde los cuales se puede trabajar para promover esta perspectiva de desarrollo con fondos de la cooperación internacional bajo esta idea compartida por las palabras que me antecedieron, de hacer que los actores locales estén en el asiento de los conductores, ¿verdad? Un modelo que hemos experimentado a través de 2 días. El primer modelo del que me gustaría hablar muy brevemente es el modelo de coimplementación. Cuando se trata de coimplementación o ser subimplementador o principal socio local para la implementación de iniciativas de cooperación, estamos pensando en modelos altamente cooperativos, a donde socios o organizaciones con amplia trayectoria y experiencia cuentan con un aliado local con el que implementan mano a mano las iniciativas. En este campo nosotros hemos tenido algunas experiencias muy gratas y significativas en los últimos años y destacamos como valor de estos procesos la importancia del fortalecimiento que fluye en ambas direcciones, las amplias posibilidades de apropiación asociadas a la confianza que transfieren los actores locales a las iniciativas, al tiempo que se potencian las posibilidades de compartir y transferir capacidades. Ahora bien, como no hay modelos perfectos, también advertimos riesgos en este tipo de implementación y me gustaría dejarlas planteadas a manera de reflexión. Las limitaciones que advertimos están asociadas a cómo ir transicionando hacia modelos que permitan un cambio de roles, ¿verdad? Una barrera real y una pregunta de fondo es cómo y cuándo un subimplementador local pasa a ser un implementador principal. ¿Qué condiciones se necesitan? Estamos invirtiendo decididamente en ello. Por otro lado, advertimos como reto significativo el riesgo de la poca interlocución de los actores locales con los aliados para el desarrollo, donantes, agencias de cooperación. Para nosotros, la pregunta de fondo resulta ser: ¿cuál es nuestra participación real en los procesos de conducción y toma de decisiones respecto a la inversión en nuestro país y región, ¿verdad? Finalmente, dejamos planteada esta reflexión de cómo se están flexibilizando los procesos y liberándose de tramitología para hacer que los recursos lleguen de manera ágil y oportuna a iniciativas locales y emergentes en contextos altamente retadores como el nuestro de estrechamiento de espacio cívico creciente. En segundo lugar, y voy a apresurar por el tiempo, quisiera destacar algunas ventajas y retos de los modelos de implementación directa. En este punto hay una decidida intención, como ya se ha mencionado antes, ¿verdad? Y nosotros lo vemos como modelos altamente eficaces y sin duda sostenibles, pero cuya implementación es para muchos de nosotros un camino a cuestas y un proyecto poco realizable. En este camino identificamos como retos significativos la necesidad de contar con habilidades técnicas y administrativas específicas que se adquieren necesariamente implementando proyectos de cooperación. Esto es como el huevo y la gallina, ¿verdad? ¿Qué va primero, las capacidades o las oportunidades? Un segundo reto que nosotros vemos es en qué condiciones se compite con organismos internacionales que tienen mucha experiencia, ¿verdad? Porque si se abren las posibilidades para acceder directamente a fondos, para ser aliados directos de iniciativas de cooperación, pero eso se compite en disparidad de condiciones, es probable que sigamos viendo los mismos actores, no necesariamente locales en la implementación. En todos los retos, en todos los casos, yo quisiera decir que los retos están asociados a la gran pregunta de quiénes son los verdaderos actores del desarrollo, ¿verdad? Yo celebro que estemos teniendo esta conversación en múltiples lenguas porque uno de los grandes retos para ser aliados para el desarrollo es tener una interlocución en nuestros propios idiomas, en nuestras propias formas de entender el mundo, a través de medios amigables y que en la forma en que diseñamos nuestras iniciativas nos planteemos quién está sentado en la mesa en todas las fases de las iniciativas para el desarrollo y construcción de paz, ¿verdad? La idea es cómo dejamos de pensar en beneficiarios desde figuras asimétricas de poder y empezamos a fomentar un trato de socios, de aliados, desde una perspectiva de la colaboración y el mutuo aprendizaje. Quiero cerrar diciendo que yo les hablo hoy día desde un país con grandes retos, retos estructurales y retos emergentes como una crisis decantada en materia de instituciones democráticas. En este sentido, nuestro llamado es hoy más que nunca a pensar en este país, en esta región y en las regiones de nuestros aliados y aliadas del uso óptimo de la inteligencia colectiva. Y esto pasa por la pregunta con la que yo quiero cerrar esta conversación muy breve, es cómo estamos trabajando para que las personas afectadas por múltiples categorías de discriminación y opresión no se caigan por la grieta de los proyectos de desarrollo y de construcción de paz, sino más bien sean los artífices de los cambios que queremos ver en nuestras sociedades. Muchas gracias por el espacio, estaré muy ansiosa de escuchar sus propias experiencias.
Thank you so much, Noemi, for those provocative questions and insights. We look forward to hearing more from your group. Now I'll turn it over to Sia.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Just want to confirm. Okay, great. Okay. So I'm Program Director for the Rule of Law and Empowerment Initiative, also known as Partners West Africa, Nigeria. And I am part of a passionate team who are working to build a Center of Excellence, that is P1, which is a women-led NGO that works in the security and justice sector space here in Nigeria. So my talk focuses firstly on discussing locally led development addressed from a situation of crisis perspective. We talk about situations of conflict, but considering the increasing instances of health and economic crisis occurring globally, in terms of development, the what, when, and where needs to take a more critical look at how we implement to better prepare for potential shocks. So where does locally led development sit within this, and how can it be leveraged? We'll look at two projects for this, one in Nigeria and one in Sierra Leone. Secondly, I want to discuss the question of sustainability. And this will be discussed looking at another experience of a project in Nigeria. So within this conversation, I'll discuss programs funded through both USAID and Department of State's Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement. We should, in this conversation, we should recognize that technical capacity to deliver and technical capacity to navigate the USG funding mechanism space are connected but differ. There have been ongoing challenges with USG funders incorporating feedback from the local per se in decision-making processes. But this conversation focuses more on the practical applications and what learnings we can derive from this. Okay, so let's look at situations of crisis and programs in Sierra Leone and Nigeria. So although the programs that I'll talk about are from different sectors, a key point of learning is where the programs have been impacted by health crisis. One in Sierra Leone by the Ebola virus disease, which was from a regional context, and the other COVID-19 in the global, more recently COVID-19 in the global context in Nigeria. So here we're looking at challenges faced and how increasing agency at the local implementation level can be beneficial. So in Sierra Leone, I worked as the program director on the Sustainable Nutrition and Agriculture Promotion Program, SNAP called in short, which was had a consortium led by ACDI Joca. The aim of the project was to reduce food insecurity and increase resiliency, livelihoods among vulnerable populations. It focused on the health and economic development sector in Sierra Leone, and it was a huge program portfolio with the structure designed for in-country, internationally led implementation. So the Ebola virus epidemic occurred, impacting most importantly lives and program implementation. Subsequently, the core project management team was evacuated, and it was a struggle to reestablish. On top of this, despite the crisis of dealing with the epidemic, the consortium was made up of organizations who could provide critical support in a different remit than what was the project was signed off to do. In this context, huge challenges were faced from moving or diverting funds from what was a development focus to a humanitarian aid focus, and eventually humanitarian assistance activities like cash transfer programming were able to be delivered. More recent implementation models, where I'm currently working now in Nigeria with P1, Partners West Africa, Nigeria. One of the projects is the Reforming Pretrial Detention in Nigeria, in bracket, call it RPDN. So P1 is part of a consortium led by Partners Global for implementation. And the aim of this project is to improve access to justice and human rights for pretrial detainees in custodial centers. Just to note, an act was passed in Nigeria which changed the name from prison to custodial centers. So that's the translation of what a custodial center is as well. So this focused on the security and justice sector in Nigeria. and the design of the program was geared for locally driven implementation. Within this COVID-19 pandemic, critically impacted lives and project delivery. In this remit, project activity was centered at police stations, which remained open throughout the pandemic. And concernedly, traffic increased due to the lockdown regulations. There was a rise in the number of arrests due to these restrictions, as members of the public were arrested for violating the pandemic restrictions. So this actually led to an even more dire situation of overcrowding in the cells, to the point that a senior police directive had to be put in place that arrests shouldn't be made for minor misdemeanors as a form of mitigation to reduce this congestion. For this implementation model, however, the core project team was resident on the ground and continued programming where possible. And as the restrictions were lifted, were able to fully put activities back in place soon as. So I think the idea among this is we need to consider where we are now and what we are facing in the current context. We are dealing with increased health and environmental crisis, and it is worthwhile, along with all the other arguments and beliefs around the drive for locally led programming, to leverage on it in this capacity as well, across all peace building, development, and humanitarian sectors, as it can lead to better responsiveness to assisting in mitigating these type of crises for both project staff who are working and citizens, and the ability to reinstate activities a lot quicker. So from the sustainability lessons, I'll talk a bit about a project in Nigeria, which was called the Greater Access to Defense and Justice, which was, P1 was part of a Partners Global Consortium here. And again, this was locally driven implementation. The aim of the project was to provide legal aid, and legal aid in the form of legal education, advice, legal representation to indigent residents within Kano State in Nigeria. Focuses on the justice sector, sorry. So the project is now closed. However, Partners West Africa ourselves, as the local partner, had built up the capacity to actually, even on project closure, to continue providing free legal aid provision after activities had completed. And this was absorbed within the local organization, P1, for about a 1-year period, until it couldn't be sustained after that point. But because the belief that the need was there for these pro bono type of services in that specific environment, what was looked at was developing an alternative private sector model for delivery, which we put in place. And this we did by utilizing the lawyers who were initially part of the program, where they were asked to submit proposals. Proposals to set up their own law firms within Kano State. And what P1 was offering them, if their proposal was viable, was to provide grants and support to assist them in setting up their own private sector firms, but attached to that was the provision to provide pro bono services. And I'm happy to say that we have a young lady who is based in office at the moment, who's actually set up her own law firm and is assisting P1 to provide these pro bono services currently in Kano. So in this discussion, we're looking at key lessons, supporting all the other robust arguments that are there for locally led development, but these center to support the arguments to the need for increasing agency, designing better models for sustainable delivery, and providing more of an enabling environment for adaptive programming, which includes dealing with situations of crisis at the local level. Across the sector, you can see, I mean, even in some of the work that we've done with Partners Global, where incremental changes are being made to increase locally driven development, with some organizations promoting it and building it into their implementation structures. But however, it is recognized that to achieve that desired increase in locally led implementation across the board will take time, and there are risks involved. But efforts are needed from all within the sector, from donor to international to local implementer. Even within P1 itself, as part of our strategic plan, we are now driving a CSO strengthening focus as well, which we aim to build capacity of other colleagues of ours within the security and justice sector. And this ranges from governance to safeguarding protocols to building financial accountability. So in our own way, we are supporting the drive towards this as well. So thank you very much. And I as well am looking forward to hearing other experiences during the discussion.
Thank you so much, Sia. Yeah, it's great to see and hear from you all about the work that you're doing to kind of empower and develop capacity of either other CSOs or, as you mentioned, with some of the lawyers that we're working with the Public Defender Office. So excellent. I'm sure folks will be really interested to hear more as well. All right, over to you, Alex.
Thank you so much, Kira, and thank you, Sia and Noemi, for your comments, and partners for bringing us all together. So locally led development is, at its core, a noble and important aspiration. Let's just establish that. What we are discussing right now is the fourth iteration since 2004 of the core idea that local organizations and stakeholders should be at the core of development efforts in their communities and countries. We all agree around that. It is also important right now to acknowledge that our context is markedly different than where we were in 2004, 2008, and so on. And I use these sort of dates with the administrations that came into power in the US. And so the context that we're discussing, in which we're discussing all of this today, is one where we are also openly and courageously, quite frankly, discussing notions of decolonization and anti-racism, not only in the United States, but across the world, particularly in some of the communities and countries where development does take place. And so we're sort of focused both within our organizations, within the sector, on doing some of the systemic legacies that have sort of brought us to a point to recognize that business as usual just doesn't work anymore. And it's, in fact, not just doesn't work, it is part of the injustice that takes place in our world. So, as we go forward, I think it's important that we also check our lexicon when we do this work and actually decolonize our own thinking. The idea of a local versus non-local or global or whatever else one means by the counter to local is inherently colonial, and so sets up the power dynamics that are loaded and ripe with problems. So we need to just be mindful as we deal with these concepts. What I'd like to do is I'd like to suggest looking at locally led development efforts through a few lenses. So first, a capacity lens, then a political lens, and then a durability or continuity lens. I don't want to call it sustainability lens because that's a different take on the concept. So I'm very carefully choosing continuity or durability lens. On the capacity lens, and I'm gonna start this initial category with a nod to the wonderful colleagues that we have at USAID, and we've all worked with, because this is going to sound a little bit critical of USAID's own efforts in this regard. But when early on in the local sort of localization and locally led development efforts about a decade ago, less than a decade ago, we started doing this, USAID missions came up by their own admission and their own assessments short on the capacity and the bandwidth to engage with local partners, right? And so in that context, they needed to bring in others, and in this case, it was organizations that had been traditionally intermediaries between local organizations and development funders, like US-based organizations or like other sort of more capacitated organizations. the other capacity issue that has come up, and Afghanistan was a very good example of this, and perhaps a very raw example at this point, that in conflict and failed states contexts, given US government rules and policies, it is very difficult for USAID mission personnel to engage with organizations and stakeholders on the ground. They were not allowed to meet with them. They were not allowed to travel out of their compounds. And so the idea of development and locally led development by proxy does not work. It doesn't actually meet the targets. And the third one, I think we have to, sort of harkening back to what I said at the onset, we have to recognize that when a US government agency is engaging with local actors, there is a cemented, inherent, and non-negotiable power imbalance that is there. We can't argue against that. Is it the same with organizations that come in and do this work? Absolutely, but it is much more likely for nonprofit organizations, for NGOs to be able to try to level the engagement plane with local organizations than it is for a US government agency. Okay. I'm just gonna check. Am I going too fast for the translation? I'm sorry if I am. I'll slow down a little bit. The political lens. At some point, I remember when, especially the Millennium Challenge Corporation was set up to do development parallel to USAID and other agencies on the ground. We started having a new dynamic, and that was sort of the crisscrossing of political tensions, I'm going to call them, not political objectives, but political tensions of a US government direct agency and intermediaries or organizations funded by USAID that were doing, for example, peace building or democracy work. And all of a sudden we saw this entanglement of US government funded efforts that were not driving the development objective in the same direction. For example, in Kazakhstan, I remember where we had, in fact, I oversaw a program in Kazakhstan where we were working with a set of strong local organizations to encourage through a legislative process the Kazakh government to adhere to its commitments to the OSCE as it was ascending to the chairmanship of the OSCE the following year, while other efforts were actually rewarding the Kazakh government for not doing those things, right? And so there was this odd situation where we would have to constantly negotiate. Well, are we actually pushing them to do this, or are we not doing this? And the organizations the efforts that really were impacted by this were the local efforts. It didn't matter that the international organization didn't see eye to eye with the effort. It was about the local organization. So U.S. political dynamics need to be sort of honestly and transparently addressed. Host country political dynamics should be should not be discounted. A lot of times when under localization, direct government aid or host government engagement on administering the aid is part of the deal. Guess who suffers most? Peace builders, civil society activists, social justice activists. They are not necessarily part of even the most reform-minded and oriented and progressive governments. They tend to take them out, right? And so this has to be a part of the conversation and the calculus as we move forward. Finally, the durability continuity lens, as I call it. Look, we have to be honest about something. Building capacity for local organizations or actors to administer USAID programs is an extremely different concept than building sustainable capacity for local organizations. the minutia and the heavy burden that a USAID contract or cooperative agreement or whatever else agreement that we are part of, the burden that's on the organization, requires that these outfits build very different and unnecessary in their local context capacities, like federal government audit capacity. You're never going to use that anywhere else other than US government funding contexts, right? They're required to build financial management systems that are well beyond the needs that they have, right? And so building that capacity for USAID grant administration versus sustainable operations, very different. And so we need to be mindful of that, and that has to be part of the way the programs are designed and the requirements that are put on the organization. And then one thing that is often assumed that is going to happen, but often does not happen, is allowing a transition period for a local organization from being a USAID partner to a freestanding local organization, right? With its own agenda and a sort of mid to long term sort of sustainability plan, is almost never part of the USAID effort, right? And so what we actually end up doing is we end up setting up organizations for potential failure or potential sort of dissolution in the long term, because they just are never able to recover from that effort under a USAID agreement. Now, I do have a positive example of this that involves Partners Global. This is back when Partners Global was Partners for Democratic Change, and I was part of an effort in Armenia with Counterpart International to set up intermediary organizations. And at that time, Partners Global Slovakia office, director and founder, actually, Dusan Andruchek, came over to Armenia. And for a long period of time, he partnered with us in making sure that we were taking the sustainability issue up right at the beginning of the program, a 5-year program, not at the very end of that program, right? And so we were able to sort of slowly build this into it. That was not part of the USAID funding model, though. And so that has to be a sort of an intentional piece of the conversation as we move forward. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Alex.